I'm here to talk to you about PMOs and how they drive business results. And to me, that means having an impact. And I'm curious, what do you guys think of when you think impact? Raise your hand. Let me know, what do you think of? Oh, okay, so this is going to be a fun one. I'll explain what impact is. Effectiveness, yeah. Improvement? Mm-hmm. Memorable. I like that, yeah. PIMDAS, that's pretty impactful, right? Change? Yeah, exactly. So this is about PMOs having impact and driving business results. But I'd first like to ask you what you think of when you hear PMO. And I'm going to ask you to be honest with me. What do you think when you hear PMO? Anyone? You can just shout it out. Enforcer. What else? Standards. Set the example. Exactly. Oh, I want to know what that table said. What was that? What's that? Processes. Right. What else?
Surge support.
Surge support. I like that one. Anything else? What is it that you think the leaders in your organization think and the stakeholders that engage with the PMO think when they hear PMO? Overhead. What's that? Gatekeeper. What else? Gotcha? Yeah, the enforcer, gotcha. Right. What else? What's that? Not real work. Overhead. Box checkers. Any of you guys ever heard any of those things for the PMO? I have been paying attention to what's been going on in the PMO space, and it's very interesting. There's some organizations, like Michael over here, that said, that's the new buzzword. That's what we're going after. We want to be that. And I'm going to have a good conversation with him about that afterwards and say, what is that? What is that you're trying to do? But it's the buzzword. Anyone go off to, have their C-suite go off to a conference and they come back and say, we're going to start a PMO. Okay, why? Because everybody else is doing it. Okay, all right, we can work with that. Let's figure out what we're trying to solve, and that's what this will be all about. But there's also a new class of business leaders out there that are saying something different, which is whatever you do, do not call it a PMO. Absolutely not. It is the Enterprise Transformation Group. It is the Strategic Planning and Execution Team. It's the, Project Support Office. But whatever you do, don't call it management. And then there's the things they call it under their breath, right? That you hope you don't hear. But this is an interesting trend, and so I'm trying to figure out why. Why is it that so many business leaders will call it anything but a PMO? It's gotten a bad name in a lot of organizations. And quite frankly, when I read a lot of books about, I'm writing a book about a PMO now, because when I read a lot of books about PMOs, I just can't get through them. There's a lot of, the buzzwords that you hear about the things the PMO shouldn't be doing are all the things that are in those books. It's the strengths become weaknesses, process heavy, and tools, and methodology, and structure, and governance. Those are all good things, but then they're bad things when we put them in the wrong hands. Use those things for good, not for evil. And that's unfortunately, see what was interesting is the gotcha was what they thought, but we think of governance and oversight and support and positive things, but they hear gotcha. But changing the name without changing the game is not going to get different results. The interesting thing that I've seen with these organizations, when I go in and work with them, or when I was a part of them, when I was building PMOs for 15 years, the first one I built was not called a PMO, and the last one that I ran was not called a PMO. And a few were in the middle, but it was because and I actually got into a very heated argument with my last boss before I started my own business. And he said, this is not a PMO. And I said, well, it looks like a PMO, it smells like a PMO, it operates like a PMO. Okay, but it's not a PMO. So if we're just going to change the name because PMOs don't work, you know, some of my blog posts I get responses, oh, PMO, that model's dead, it never worked, I've never liked it. If the PMO, things that are broken with the PMO, and there are some things that are broken with some PMOs, if that doesn't work, then why are we just changing the name and doing the same exact things? How is that going to make us any better off? Because what is the definition of doing the same thing over and over and over again but expecting different results? Okay, so maybe there is another way. What? What'd I miss? Oh. Oh, was I doing this? So then why do we do it? Why do we create PMOs in the first place? Thank you. To get results. Anyone else? Or is that it? Standardization. Standardization for a purpose, I hope. What else?
Execute your strategy.
Yes. Right?
So you can get predictable results over time.
Exactly. Exactly. And also to decrease failed projects, right? We want to get better at something. If it's not working, we put a PMO in place because we want to decrease the failed projects. We want to increase on time and on budget. We want to align with strategy. PMO should be aligned with strategy, right? That's what it's there for. Maximize business impact. That's why we're doing them. So we start off with really great intentions. But then something happens. And I've been trying to figure out what that is because I'm seeing these trends that say, okay, it starts off great, but then something breaks along the way. And what is that? Oftentimes it's because there's a lack of clarity and focus. Things shift, direction shifts, things happen along the way, and we've spent all this time and energy doing this and getting this in place, so now we've got to shift over here and do something different. And that takes time and energy and money. We've got an unclear value proposition. What is our purpose? What business problem are we trying to solve? And I've certainly seen it when I was running PMOs, wavering executive support. They're with you here, and then they see something shiny and they're over here. And they're not paying attention to you at all anymore. And you're saying, but you're my sponsor for the PMO, come back to me. But they got something shiny syndrome and you're done. There's no link to the business outcomes. But wait a minute, I thought we said we just created this to align with strategy and to get results. How did we lose sight of that? So what's happening? I say that the PMO is there to have impact. I say that it's not too late. Do you guys think it's too late? Feel free to disagree with me. There's got to be someone in this room, and I want to find them, that thinks the PMO is just, it's got to go. I'm going to tell you all about what we do with those naysayers in a minute. I think if we can have impact, if we can show value, we will return the name PMO, or whatever you want to call it, to a place people want to work and an organization the business wants to operate with. So I've developed a system, as us process people are known to do, to capture, and this is an entire training series, so this is just some highlights, but some things I want to give you today to walk away and think about, how can I think and operate a little bit differently to show that the PMO and all of you managing projects can have impact. First, it's about identifying your priorities. Then, we want to manage stakeholders. Seems pretty straightforward, right? It's not often the things we think about that really actually make the difference here. And then we must perform relentlessly. Relentlessly. It's about getting results, right? And we have to be okay and agile enough. I used the word agile in a PMO presentation. We have to be agile enough to shift when the needs of the organization shift. And communicate, 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 but with purpose. And then, and only then, can we transform our own mindset and theirs, whoever the they is, all of the theys. So step one, identify priorities. This seems pretty easy, right? We start off in a pretty good place here. A lot of people said they got why the PMO was there. It's about identifying the priorities for the organization and executing on that. So we start off all right. We start off with, where's the business going? What are the most important things the business needs to get done? What's going to drive results? Do we agree we start there, right? That's what the PMO's, it's a wonderful place to be in the beginning. That's what we believe our purpose is. But do they even really need a PMO to solve this problem? Just because everybody else is doing it, or just because it's the buzzword of the moment, I would suggest that you take a step back and say, wait a minute, is this really the solution to this problem? Because the PMO is not the solution to every problem. A lot of times I'm telling people, don't create a PMO. You're making it much bigger than it needs to be. You're making it much more complicated than it needs to be because there is some infrastructure required when you create a PMO. Shift your focus. When we decide that we are going to have a PMO and we've identified our priorities and we start thinking about how we're going to execute that work, we think about it in terms of projects and the triple constraint. And we need to stop that thinking and start thinking about investments and return on investment instead of just the project. The triple constraint is a set of metrics that you can use as indicators, but they're not why you're there. You are creating projects for the purpose of realizing an investment, not just to say I did it on time, with the appropriate scope, or even gold-plated it, and under budget. Woohoo, I win. But you know what? We don't need it anymore. So it seems easy so far, right? We got this. A lot of organizations think this way and talk this way and think about their projects as investments. The project portfolio is an investment portfolio. The project is an individual investment. And the minute that investment loses its value, I mean, are you guys those people that hold on to the stocks when they're just... At some point, you need to be okay cutting your losses. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. What I am suggesting to you is that every conversation you have, you are focusing on the outcomes and the impacts, not the time, the scope, and the cost. Once you've started that conversation, where I think things start to break down is that we then forget to continue that conversation. So we start off right. Okay, great. We are managing a portfolio of investments, but then how do we measure progress? And how do we measure success? And are we talking to anybody about the actual value realized 6 months after that project went into production? Or that new service was created? Or that new business line was created that was going to generate millions? Is it doing that? Once we have identified those priorities, then we need to manage stakeholders, right? Well, who are our stakeholders? So we have anybody that can positively or negatively influence your project, right? Or anybody that thinks they're impacted or affected by the outcomes of that project. Not just the people you're thinking about on the project team or the business or the obvious folks. It's the people that are hiding, lurking in the shadows that you don't even know are there. You got to think about those folks as well. And if you're on a project, if you're running a portfolio for IT, they're kind of your business. Who they serve is kind of the business. Oh, but don't forget, you've got consumers on the end that you don't even know or talk to or know a thing about. They are your business. When you're in an organization and you've created a PMO and you're trying to interact with, people, it's important to think about the centers of gravity. Where does the energy to drive change come from? I was in an organization once that, all of them, that there were different power centers. And every organization was different. And even different departments had different subcultures and different power. And when I needed to get something done, I needed to understand where those decisions were made. Every organization I've worked in or worked with, that decision-making authority, what's on the org chart, is not necessarily how decisions get made. In order to be effective, you need to understand where those centers of gravity are. And then figure out who's with you. I have a little technique I use for this. I call it the lovers, the haters, and the just don't cares. I'm an ISTJ, believe it or not, and so I like to categorize people, even categorize myself. So we have the lovers, those that are with you, those that are change agents, those that want to work with you, those that are supportive of the PMO, those that are sort of supportive of the projects. Take care of those people and keep them in that category by continuing a conversation with them. Not about triple constraint, but about impact and value your PMO is having. And then there's the haters. You know those folks. Ones that are constantly telling you what's wrong with your project or your PMO. The one in the room here somewhere that I haven't found yet that's saying PMOs don't work. Don't listen to what she's saying. Everybody thinks those are the worst group to work with. I love them. And I'll tell you why. At least they're talking to you. At least you know who they are. They're having a conversation with you, and it may not be a pleasant conversation, but it's a conversation nonetheless. And Susan, you'll appreciate this, my risk friend. I immediately give those people a whiteboard marker and put them in front of the whiteboard and say, tell me everything that's wrong with what we're doing. And they love that. They are happy to tell you where you're messing up, what you're doing wrong, and why what you're doing won't work. Do you know what they've just created for you? A risk register. They just told you everything that's going to go wrong, and now you take it one step further. Now, what would you do to fix that? Yes. Have them do the work for you. And then they start doing that work for you, and they say, and then you should do this, and then you should do that, and then all of a sudden, this is their idea. And they're helping you build a rock star PMO or project. And they've helped you find all the holes and fill them and figure out how you're going to manage to those risks that could come up. Then they're your lovers. Yeah, it does sound a little weird when you say it that way. Then there's the folks that just don't care. These are the ones you've got to be careful for, because these are the stakeholders you haven't yet identified, or the ones that you think shouldn't care but have really strong power and influence. They can be trouble for you. These are the ones you spend your energy on. And how you do that is you figure out what they care about. How do they win or lose when your PMO is successful. And you don't just look at those that you think are the naysayers here or that you think don't care, because sometimes that person that doesn't care is your sponsor. And they might actually lose if the PMO wins. Guess what? They're not your sponsor. But they might be in that role. So it's identifying those stakeholders and understanding how they will be impacted or affected, how will they win or lose when your PMO is successful, and drive accountability with them. I have a very simple technique I use for driving accountability. I never ask someone to do something on a certain time period. I always say, when can you do that? When can you have that done? That very simple shift puts the accountability on them because they're verbalizing, I will do this for you. And the very act of verbalizing that changes the conversation. And I was working with a very large organization, and they were creating this really big change and putting a PMO in place. And I said, how have you been doing on communication? And they said, well, we did a town hall 6 months ago. And I said, okay, what'd you do after that? Well, we sent an email 3 months ago. How's that working out for you? I said, don't assume they understand just because you get it and you communicated to them months ago. Of course, you guys understand the value of a PMO, except for wherever that person is that doesn't. But you can't assume that they get it. And we all think our sponsor is one of those people that would get it, right? Sometimes they don't. Or they are passionately engaged, but they have no idea what their job is. They really want to help, and they're driving you crazy. We have a responsibility to train them to work with us the way we need to work with them. There's a whole separate presentation on that. You can probably get it off my website. You need to train your sponsor on what you need from them so that they can help you. And change resistance. Who here thinks people are resistant to change? People are not resistant to change. We would not exist if people were resistant to change. What people are resistant to is having change done to them. Anyone ever grab your hand when you're not paying attention and start yanking you somewhere? Before you've ever had the time to think about if that's a place you want to go, you're pulling back, right? Because it's an instinct to resist what we don't understand. But if that person walks next to you and holds your hand and says, come with me, we're going this way together, and here's why you want to come with me, they're a lot more likely to go. Because you know what you do? You give them their whiff 'em. They're what's in it for me. Why would I want to come? Why would I want to go where you're taking me? Anyone remember what the third one was? IMP. Perform relentlessly. Now, we're the get-it-done career, right? So we do this pretty well, right? This would be our sweet spot. Before asking them to change, before asking them to do something differently, before asking them to actually appreciate your PMO, get something done for them. Build value. Show results. When somebody comes and tells you they're going to do all of these wonderful things for you, you're a bunch of project managers. I know your first reaction is, yeah, show me. Well, guess what? The business is the same way. You're coming in saying, I'm the expert. I know this stuff. Just trust me. Actions are far more impactful than words. Pay attention to those around you. Those that you trust, those that you count on, they don't tell you, they show you. So before you start even asking for your your PMO to be seen as the enterprise solution provider, as the strategy driver. Go get something done for them. Go have an impact. Give them a sense of value and outcomes in engaging with you. Not triple constraint. Value, outcomes, impact. Stuff is happening. And I don't care if you do your project schedule on a napkin. Just go get it done. Yes, we can do tools and we can do process, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it really, for the most part, your business leaders are not interested in how many templates you have. Have you ever had a CEO or a business leader come to you and say, oh, wait a minute, you don't have enough tools for me to use or enough templates for me to fill out. Go back and get some more templates, then come tell me, and I'll go fill all that stuff out before we can have a conversation. And keep your commitments. Do what you say you are going to do every single time. When you want people to trust you, you have to show that you understand the value, you can speak their language, you can talk about the things they want to hear, and you're going to get it done. Because that's what relentless performance looks like. Good so far? We can do this, right? Not so bad. They will love you if you can deliver for them. Remember what's next? Adapt. So when we create a PMO, and we spend the first year putting in Project Server and creating a huge templates library, and then the organization says, you know what, never mind. We don't want you to do this, we want you to do this. How much did it just cost us for all these things we did that nobody wanted or nobody needs anymore? Okay, we can reuse 25%. How much money did we spend on that? The PMO is an investment in and of itself for the organization. I had something happen to me recently that blew my mind, because this doesn't happen to us much in this space. I'm working with a client, and we're going through and prioritizing his entire portfolio for the organization. And we're going through all of his business projects. And he said, wait, there's one missing, the CEO. And his whole leadership team. And I said, what's missing? He said, the stuff we're doing with you. You're helping us bring portfolio management and project management and set up a PMO. That's number one. I said, what? Hold on, say that again. That's what? And I even challenged and pushed back on it, because I wanted to know how sturdy that was. Don't just say it, because, you're going to hurt my feelings otherwise. No. They were very serious. Every one of them said, if we don't do this right, we will not be able to execute on our business strategy. That's the conversation you want your leaders having with you. But if you have spent a year or more building templates and tools and process before you've ever had a chance to show value and perform and have an impact, you've boiled the ocean when all you needed to do was put one pot on the stove. Adjust your management style. So we hear that depending on who we're working with, we should adjust our style and make sure that we are managing the people around us. I say your management style should be adjusted based on the environment you're in and their familiarity with what you're doing. With, a PMO. Is this the first time a PMO has come in? Your management style should reflect that. Do they understand the value? Okay, you can behave a little bit differently. Process meets business needs. The amount of methodology you create has to be flexible. A lot of us abuse methodology. I call it methodology abuse. We throw all of the things at once that you need at a project or a problem without meeting the business where they are in what they need in the moment. And then we do this fun thing called customization gone wild. Anybody see a system go in place, a project management tool go in place in an organization, and then 3 years later it's customized so much that we have no idea that it even came from that vendor? That never happens, right? And you know what? We've stopped using it because it doesn't actually provide value to us anymore. And all the real data is sitting over on people's Excel spreadsheets, on people's desktops. You have no idea what's really going on in the organization. And all that wasted energy happened. All that wasted energy was spent. You need to be okay with reprioritizing regularly, depending on what the organization needs. And if you're a big, monolithic PMO with heavy tools and heavy process, you cannot be agile enough for when the organization shifts direction and is willing to bring you with them. Be where they need you and who they need you to be at all times. What's next? Communicate with purpose. Any of you guys get those status reports that are like 14 pages long? Do you read them? Do you have to read them? Do you write them? Careful who I'm talking to here. So, we have to speak their language. We have to speak the language of the business. Talk to them in terms that they understand. This is not about, we delivered this piece of scope. This much business value was delivered, and the impact of that on the organization is going to be this. How do people digest information? Do you have that business leader that wants the bulleted list versus the one that wants to see pretty pictures? By the way, the higher up you are in the organization, the more you need to rely on pictures to tell your story and a very succinct list of bullets. It is not because they're dumb. It is because they have 15 of these meetings in a single day, and your job is to focus them where you need them so that they have the information they need to make good decisions on your behalf and move on to the next thing they've got to deal with. Everything should be about actions and decisions. Everything should be about telling that story of value. And respect their time. You don't like being CC'd on every single email that goes out? Don't do that to your business leaders. Right? And don't invite them to every meeting, because what you're doing is you're confusing them. They don't know how they're supposed to help you because you have them involved in everything. You are business leaders. You should know when and how to bring them in and tell them what they're there to do. It's part of their training. You don't want to burden them with unnecessary information, and I like to think of the Goldilocks, just right. Not too much, so that you've given them that 14-page report and they're stuck down on the bottom of page 13 and and you don't even need them there. The thing that's on page 13, you're so frustrated, you've got 5 more minutes in your meeting, and they haven't even gotten you what you needed. You put that report in their hands. We have to take responsibility for giving them just the right information so they can help us and move on. Tell them what they need to know to help you. And I have an example in here that's free on my website. You can download it afterwards. I'll show you how if you want to see how I do it in a single page. One piece of paper. If you can't tell your whole PMO story, your whole project story on a single page, then you're doing yourself a disservice because they're not going to read it. Nobody reads long things anymore. Not when they have 15 meetings on their schedule in a day. What was next? Now remember? Transform the mindset. This is where PMO leaders often start. I'm going to convince them they need a PMO. I'm going to convince them that this is the way they should be doing things. I'm going to tell them everything they were doing wrong. And guess what? I did that. It didn't work. Don't do it. I got a few battle scars to prove it. I thought I knew better. I thought I knew how to do all of this. I thought I knew what was best for them. But we don't. Because we aren't the subject matter experts in the business. The business is the subject matter experts in the business. So before we start trying to change their minds about the value of the PMO, we need to change our mindset to understand our role as a service provider to the business, as a solution to the business. We are the strategy navigator for the organization. We hold the power of the portfolio of all the things that matters to the business in our hands. That is a powerful place to be. But only if we change our minds and our mindset to be about having the business conversation. This is at the end because you can't change anyone's mind until you deliver. Go perform relentlessly, show results, show you can speak their language. Then you can have the conversation you need to have with them about my PMO needs resources. My PMO needs funding. You know why? Because the PMO became a strategic investment to deliver all other investments. You have those keys in your hand now. You built credibility with them. You showed them that you can help them, that you can solve their problems. And then you change the conversation. All of that other stuff has to happen first. Because shifting the culture begins with shifting ourselves and our mindset and our behaviors. And if you are in an organization that you think appreciates the PMO, but you're not sure, or even if you're in an organization that does appreciate the PMO, you better be darn sure that you're continuing to have that business conversation with them. You should all be thought of as business leaders, not IT, not the box checkers, but the business leaders. And the purpose of project management itself is not the end game. Project management is the process that we use to drive business results. And the PMO is the engine that generates that impact for the organization. Anyone remember what these are now? Come on, you can do it. What do we do first? Identify the priorities. Next? Yes, manage stakeholders. Next? Perform relentlessly. Go get it done. Then you have a voice. Adapt to the shifting needs. Be flexible. Build small and then grow. Serve one business need and get that done really, really well, and then add other services. Communicate with purpose, with focus, with clarity about getting to decisions and actions and progress and results. And your language is about getting results. It's about showing value. So that ultimately, the PMO becomes the strategy navigator for the organization. The keys to the kingdom are in your hands because you are now the impact driver. You are the impact engine. You're the results. You're the business value. When you do your job well, the entire organization has a portfolio of exploding value because you did your job well. So remember, the PMO is the engine that drives the impact generation for the organization. And if you do that, it doesn't matter what you call it. Just go get it done. Thank you. If you want the presentation, if you want the dashboard, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I send out a weekly newsletter on Tuesdays with all this kinds of stuff, and it's just like I talk about it here and using the same voice. All you need to do is text this number, 33444. That's the phone number, and then put in those words, and it will automatically send you any of those materials you asked for. Now, anyone have any questions? I was that good, huh? Just kidding. Any questions? Anyone resonate with this? Does this make any sense to anyone? Anyone going to go do anything differently starting on Monday? Email me and tell me about it. Go do something different and tell me how it works. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what works for you. And if you have ideas or things you want me to write about it, I do. I have a survey and people fill it out and they say, here's what I want to know more about, and I get it scheduled and I tell them more about those topics. Stakeholder management, training your sponsor, what's working with PMOs, metrics, all kinds of fun stuff, only for the people in this room. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So what are the locations for the Project Management Day of Service? So we are just getting started. We've only done 2 in the DC area. We are doing the 3rd one here in the other ballroom. I don't know if you noticed that picture from earlier. That was 600 people in the ballroom downstairs last year. And we'll have about the same number again this year. There was also one in Houston. Houston PMI chapter will probably do one again. There's some in Australia. I'm still trying to convince them they should fly me out to be for that one. There's one with the New York City PMI chapter. And then a lot of the chapters that are in PMI chapters are in what's called Region 5. So that goes from the whole DC, Maryland, Virginia area all the way down to Kentucky. And we're still working with them to figure out what locations are going to be the host. Not everybody will come here because we couldn't possibly fit them all. And we want to work with our partners, the University of Maryland. But they will be happening in different areas up and down the East Coast. So if you go to pmdos.org, pmdos.org, we're going to start putting up separate web pages for each of the places hosting a PMDOS so that you can learn more. And if anyone wants to be a part of helping us, this is my plug for our volunteers over here. We are collecting volunteer applications now, and you can start right now engaging in the process of helping us create the next PMDOS, do all the planning work for that, as well as Project Management for Change, the nonprofit organization that was created specifically to serve this community and ensure the sustainability of PMDOS. We are looking for volunteers for that as well. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
What if they don't meet their deadline they set for themselves? How do you follow up in a positive way of giving them some kind of consequence for the time?
So I'm going to give you the consulting answer. It depends. So the question was, what do you do to hold people accountable if they say they're going to do something and then they don't do it? So there's a lot of things that I'll stay and talk to you about afterwards. I have a whole article on managing stakeholders. And it might even be about managing difficult stakeholders on my website if you want to learn more about that. But essentially, it's about the conversation after the first conversation. So you don't just say, when are you going to have this done? They tell you a date, and then you come back on that date. It's about it's monitoring and control, right? That's what we do as project managers. It's the continued conversation about progress. How can I remove barriers for you? What do you need? What's impacting your ability to meet your commitments? Using the word commitments, right? So you need to help them help you. And so if you can have the conversation be about, I am your solution, I am your support network, not just your, the one that's, nagging you all the time, right? Be the solution. When you see someone struggling, it's not time for you to start pointing your finger to them and saying, you've got to go deal with that, or I'm going to go tell your boss, or whatever. It's about, how can I help you? because you are there as a project manager and a PMO leader to serve. Your first job is service to every one of your stakeholders. Make sense? Any other questions? I want to know what our newest recruit back there, project manager back there, looks awfully young to be a project manager. I want to know what she thinks. You staying awake back there, sweetie? No? No, it's a struggle. I know. I know. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Sure. So the way I start that, actually, I'll tell a very quick story. Anyone know Carl Pritchard in here? He's a very dear friend of mine and has been for years. He's one of the authors of the PMBOK, by the way, so you can thank him for your nighttime reading. And he used to be, in a former life, a broadcaster. For a radio station. He was a radio broadcaster. And he was interviewing Mr. Rogers, the Mr. Rogers, right? I know I grew up loving him. And Mr. Rogers said something very interesting before they started the presentation, or the interview. He said, "What does success look like for you when this interview is over? How will we know we have been successful?" And he said, "If you tell me that, I can guarantee this is going to be a good interview." And that seems very, very simple, but that's the conversation you need to be having. And it starts with letting them think big and not using numbers right away. Let them just think and write it down. What does success look like? Let's talk about what that feels like, what it looks like. Okay, now how are we going to know we got there? How are we going to know? It won't be because we were on budget. It will be because our membership site is exploding, or our new market, we've created all these new customers. Okay, so that's new customers. Well, what does that look like? And so it's a concept we're all familiar with, progressive elaboration. You start with the pie in the sky and you let them be up there in the sky for a while and get all that out and write it all down. And then you can start peeling back the layers until you get to something you can measure. Because ultimately, it's not up to us what they measure. It just has to be measurable. That make sense? Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So Agile and PMOs, can't we all just get along? Yes, we can. And I think what's interesting, when Agile started getting big, I was hearing things like, "Oh, we don't do documentation, we do Agile." Oh. I'm sure none of you have ever heard that. Or, "Oh, no, we don't need process, we do Agile." I would argue that there is so much project management, micro project management going on in Agile if you're doing it right. So this goes back to the PMO being adaptive and meeting the needs of your stakeholders. So stop trying to shove a waterfall process at an Agile thinking organization. The question you should be asking yourselves as PMO leaders is, how can I be of service? How can I help? And what do they need, right? And that question could be different. The question could be answered in many different ways depending on the needs of that organization and their flavor of Agile, right? But it could be that you help teach, how to be a Scrum Master. Or it could, maybe, or maybe you are doing the Agile implementation methodology inside of a larger project management framework. Implementation methodology and project management are not the same thing. Project management is what you should do. Implementation methodology is how you do it. So project management says you got to manage risk. Well, shouldn't you do that in Agile projects too? You got to manage time. They do lots of that. You got to manage scope. What are these sprints things going on over here, right? So it's about understanding how to connect what we should do and the way the organization chooses to do that. Does that help?
Okay. Please join me again in thanking Laura for a great presentation.
Thank you.
We have a small